The AR-15 that we have come to know today was not inevitable. They were controversial, fragile looking, aluminum and plastic in a world that trusted wood and steel. Senior officers laughed at them. Soldiers didn't trust them, and yet, within a decade, this strange rifle would replace the battle rifles that came before it. Today we're going back to the beginning, before the myths, before the manuals, into the first era of the AR-15, and how a revolutionary idea survived its most dangerous years. This is a re-recording because the video uploaded to YouTube before was trash. The audio was garbage. Before the M16 was a battlefield rifle, it was a sales pitch. Before doctrine, before bureaucracy, before Vietnam, there was a rifle that trusted engineering over tradition. The Colt 601 was Colt's first production AR-15. It was manufactured in the late 1950s and early 60s, immediately after Colt purchased the design from Armalite. And it was not a finalized military rifle in any means. It was a sales rifle, built to convince US military decision makers and foreign militaries that it was a viable war rifle. And every design choice reflects that mission. The 601 embodies three radical ideas for its time: extreme lightweight, using aluminum receivers, a pencil-thin 20-inch barrel, and steel only where necessary. At 6 pounds unloaded, this felt like a feather compared to the M1 Garands and M14s that came before it. It has modern ergonomics. It has an inline stock with the firing system, a pistol grip for better control, and an inline recoil system with no op rod or piston out of line with the rest of the system. And it has a visual modernity. Colt wanted this to look futuristic, not traditional. This is intentional marketing. The iconic green fiberglass furniture was not chosen for camouflage. Early fiberglass resins naturally cured green. Black dye consistency wasn't solved yet, and Colt leaned into that space-age aesthetic. The buttstock, handguards, and grips varied wildly in shade, from a pale mint to a deep olive, because quality control on pigmentation was still primitive. The Colt 601 upper is known as slick side, meaning it did not have a forward assist, nor a shell deflector, just clean, uninterrupted lines. At the time, Eugene Stoner believed that forcing a round into the chamber was a bad idea. I tend to agree. The rifle was designed around the assumption of clean burning ammo, and weight savings was a priority. This design choice later becomes controversial, but it's pure Eugene Stoner. The 20-inch pencil-thin barrel is very thin and lightweight forward of the gas block. What's important to note about these barrels on the 601s is that they have a 1 in 14 twist rate. That was to stabilize the 55 grain projectile in warmer climates. Also, these magazines, you see these earlier pattern waffle type magazines on these early guns. However, once development moved to these straight lined magazines that we're all familiar with, you don't really see a lot of these earlier models. The consequence of the 1 in 14 were that you only had marginal stability of the projectile in colder weather. And this would lead to future rifles having the 1 in 12 twist rate. Looking at the bolt carrier group on the 601s, they had a chrome bolt carrier and firing pin. However, these lines that you can see here would not have been there because those are for a forward assist. We'll get to that later. It would have just been nice and smooth. The choice to use chrome was for ease of cleaning, corrosion resistance, and reduced friction. However, early metallurgy wasn't fully matured yet, so bolt lugs often cracked under full auto firing, and the staking of the gas keys was very inconsistent. The 601 worked, but it was not yet optimized for combat. And this entire era of rifles had safe, semi, and full auto. Sustained automatic fire from this rifle revealed weakness to heat sensitivity, barrel whip, and extreme parts wear. And this reinforced that this is a light infantry weapon, not a machine gun, not a support weapon. The 601 feels almost handmade. Using early anodizing techniques, some receivers had a slight purple hue and inconsistent surface texturing. Receiver tension was slightly loose compared to modern standards. Handguards often rattled. If you look at this handguard, it was broken when I took it from an armory. It really gives you a vibe of function over refinement. Despite this, it has a mechanical honesty to it. Nothing unnecessary, nothing hidden. The Colt 601 saw limited Air Force testing, and it was mainly used by advisors before the Vietnam War really kicked off. Green Berets fighting the NVA in the shadows. So it was never standardized, but it proved the concept of the AR-15 as a war rifle. The 601 is the purest expression of Stoner's vision, a rifle unburdened by bureaucracy and a design that trusted engineering over doctrine. It represents the moment that the infantry rifle entered our modern era, and it would lead to the 602. The Colt 602 represents Colt tightening up production while maintaining what worked. We talked about how the rifling changed from 1 in 14 to a 1 in 12 twist. They also lengthened the chamber and throat of the barrel so that it could use a larger variety of NATO ammunition, including the longer tracer ammunition. And these specifications carry forward to today. Also, the 601 used the earlier duckbill flash hider that you can see here, whereas the 602 used the 3-prong flash hider that we see all the way until the M16A1. 602 updated the charging handle to what we see as the most basic charging handles today, and we also see the 602 moving to black furniture, but there is an overlap with the green furniture. The 602 also added an R mark for right windage on the rear sight. It maintains no forward assist, so slick side and slick carrier. And there was a general progression of upgrading to parts such as the bolt catch, bolt release, magazine release during this period. The 602 performed much better in the jungles of Vietnam than the 601 did, and it continued to prove its concept, but it was not yet standardized for mass combat use. Since we've been talking about the slick side 601 and 602, I'm going to skip the 603 for a minute and talk about the 604. The 604 was the further development of the 602 and what became the original M16 rifle adopted by the Air Force. So for slick sides, the 601, initial development, 602, refined, 604, adopted for standardization. The specs are basically a 602, but everything was standardized across the board, as well as the roll marks and markings on the rifles. It's important to note that the Air Force maintained the slick side deliberately. They did not need the forward assist. Speaking of the forward assist, time to go to the 603. The Colt Model 603 is what the Army adopts as the XM16E1, or Experimental M16 version 1. And after being standardized, it would become an M16A1. The big through line here is that the 603 becomes the forward assist model. And this is the defining rifle of the Vietnam era. Where the earlier models were being field tested by special operations, this is the rifle that would be mass issued for combat. The Army needed an extra control, a way to manually push the bolt into battery if it didn't seat correctly. And that requirement is what drove the design. Forward assist assembly here on the right side of the receiver engages with these lines cut into the bolt carrier here. So if it doesn't go all the way into battery, the soldier can manually force it into battery. The reason the Army wanted this was because of historical doctrine, not because the rifle actually needed it. You see, the Army had decades of experience with the M1 Garand and later the M14, where the operation of the rifle was manually controlling the bolt. And if it didn't go all the way into battery, you could slap it into battery. And since the Army was doing that for decades, a rifle that couldn't be manually closed felt incomplete and risky. The forward assist was viewed as a way to make sure the bolt was locked in place, almost a way to give a soldier one more option in case everything went wrong. And that's really it. It's a different design than the M1 Garand, and it doesn't need it. However, it is good for press checks in the modern era. When we're talking about the XM16E1 and the M16A1, there is a spectrum of standardization shift. Historical documents reference the actual physical shift in February of 1967 when the X was dropped. However, all of the changes to the rifle took place gradually over time. So minus what was stamped on the side of the rifle, the E1 and the A1 really change across a timeline. So if you're going to rebuild one of these rifles, you're not really rebuilding a model, you're rebuilding a stamp in time. Let's talk about chroming. In 1967, rifles got a chrome-lined chamber and not the bore. They were seeing corrosion happening in the chamber, and cases were getting stuck and failing to extract. And this change appeared on both the XM16E1 and the M16A1s. In 1970, the barrels got not only the chamber, but the bore chrome-lined. This greatly improved corrosion resistance, made cleaning easier, increased barrel life, and improved the overall reliability of the rifle. After 1970, every rifle including the Air Force's M16s, got the full chrome line treatment as well. The M16's chrome lining is one of the quiet but critical contributors to the early reliability issues in Vietnam. We talked about how the 601 used the early duckbill flash hiders, and then we moved to these 3-prongs. During the development into the M16A1s, we go from these 3-prongs to birdcage flash hiders that we see on M16A2s and newer. However, the bottom of the M16A2s is closed, making it act like a compensator and flash hider. The M16A1s had these cuts all the way around 360 degrees. The early models on the right side of the lower receiver were called slab-sided. So this fencing that you see here didn't exist. Field testing reported that jungle foliage, personal webbing and gear, as well as entering vehicles, could cause the magazine to be dropped from the rifle. So this raised rib was added here to prevent the magazine from being dropped, which still wasn't good enough, which led to all of this fencing being added so that the magazine release cannot be pressed unless it's on purpose with your finger. You see it on late M16E1s and M16A1s, and we see it on all lower receivers today. The M16A1s are where we start to see trapdoor butt plates for storage of the cleaning kit. When it comes to roll marks and markings, we see XM16E1 up until February of 67, and then M16A1s after that. But because these were so commonly rebuilt and refurbished, they are very much a mixed match of parts over a decade. So when you're reproducing these, you're not building a model, you're building a timestamp. You're building a month and year of this rifle was seen in a black and white photo in this time. It's very much a transitional mix between the E1 and the A1. The lower receiver does have the A2 reinforcement here, just because I had so many stripped lowers laying around, but I would like to source an original just to feed the TISM. The barrel and bolt carrier group are both from Brownells. Everything else is from original M16 parts that the Army was throwing away, and I saved. So it's basically an all-original rifle. Old and authentic. It makes me happy, and it definitely feeds the TISM. And so the M16A1 rifle is where the AR15 stops being a new rifle with teething issues and becomes a standardized service system. The continuous feedback loop that altered manufacturing and led to where we are. The last family of early AR-15s we need to discuss is the CAR-15 family, which includes the XM177 carbines. XM177 is what Colt and the military used to talk about their short-barreled carbines with moderator. There are 2 models of the XM177, the E1, or Colt Model 609, and the E2, or Colt Model 629. It also has close siblings like the Model 610, or GAU-5, which is the Air Force designation. When you hear CAR-15, you're typically thinking about an XM177. The weapon exists because of a core demand during the Vietnam era. Give us M16 firepower and something shorter for the jungles, vehicles, and special warfare. But shortening the M16 created immediate engineering problems. Since the rifle was designed around a 20-inch barrel, shooting 5.56, 223, shortening that system drastically changed the dwell time, parts wear, reliability, and lowered the velocity of the cartridge, meaning less terminal effects on its target. The inclusion of the moderator helped the rifle run reliably due to the barrel length changes. It also helped with flash reduction and blast concussion mitigation out of that shorter barrel. The XM177E1 had a 10-inch barrel with the added moderator. And those are what you see in like early days of advising. The E2 is a more standardized version and had an 11.5-inch barrel, much wider use, and ends up giving you about a 16-inch barrel with the moderator when put into practice. The CAR-15 weapons had a 2-position carbine stock, shorter, rounded carbine handguards, maintained the A1 style upper receiver, as well as the pencil-thin profiled barrel, but add that long moderator on the end. They were used by MACV SOG, Green Berets, LRRP units, and other special and recon units throughout the Vietnam War. I see the CAR-15 series as the bridge between the M16s of the first generation and the M4 carbines that we use today. And although we've mostly been talking about the Vietnam War, this first generation and the M16A1s were used in a lot of conflicts around the world. This rifle fought in the Dominican Civil War, the Laotian, Laotian Civil War, the Cambodian Civil War, the Yom Kippur War, used by Israeli Defense Forces, the Lebanese Civil War, the El Salvador Civil War, the Nicaraguan conflict, which is also a civil war, and Operation Urgent Fury, Grenada, 1983. It was also still used in the Gulf War in the early 1990s, as the M16A2s hadn't been completely issued to the services. The M16A1 endured because it was lightweight, very effective with its 5.56 cartridge and 20-inch barrel. There was a massive USA distribution across the world, and it's a very easy weapon to train on. So the bottom line, the M16A1 isn't just a Vietnam rifle. It became a global Cold War service weapon, and it's influenced infantry combat up until today. Think of the AR-15 not as a gun, but as a mid-century industrial art. A sculpture born from slide rules, drafting tables, and the optimism of aerospace engineering. The rifle of this era rejects decoration outright. There is no flourish, no excess, no attempt to impress the eye through tradition. Its beauty comes from line and proportion. The long, uninterrupted barrel draws the eye forward like a horizon. The straight stock forms a clean axis, giving the rifle a calm, almost architectural balance. Everything aligns. Nothing fights itself. It is minimalist in the same way a modernist building is minimalist, because every unnecessary element has been removed. The forged aluminum receivers are the heart of the piece. Their muted gray-black anodizing absorbs light rather than reflecting it, giving the rifle a soft, almost matte dignity. Slight variations in tone between upper and lower aren't flaws, they're brush strokes. Evidence of human hands and wartime production. The fence on the lower receiver is especially telling. An asymmetrical detail that breaks perfection just enough to remind you this is a living design evolving in real time. Steel and aluminum, matte and satin, black furniture against gray metal. The Parkerized steel components add texture and depth, grounding the rifle visually. They feel honest. No polish, no shine, just surface meant to endure. The forward assist housing adds a subtle mass to the right side, a visual counterweight that gives the rifle tension and character. Like a well-composed painting, the early AR-15 relies on contrast, not decoration. The triangular handguards are the boldest artistic statement of the rifle. Sharp lines, faceted surfaces, unapologetically angular. They look almost sculpted rather than molded. They are uncomfortable by traditional aesthetic standards, and that's the point. They belong to the same visual language as brutalist architecture. Strong shapes, exposed function, beauty through purpose. The M16A1 doesn't try to look timeless, it looks of its moment. The 1960s belief that technology, weight reduction, and new materials could reshape the future. And that is what elevates it to art. It is honest, it is restrained, it is confident enough not to embellish itself. The AR of the early era is not beautiful because it was made to be admired. It is beautiful because it was made with absolute conviction. By the time the M16A1 emerged, the AR-15 is no longer an experiment. What began as a lightweight, optimistic prototype designed around engineering theory and ideal conditions has been reshaped by combat. Every change we discussed, from twist rates to chrome lining, from slick side to forward assists, reflects lessons learned the hard way. The first era of the AR-15 isn't about a single rifle model. It's about philosophy colliding with reality. The early rifles trusted simplicity. The later models demanded redundancy. And the M16A1 sits at the crossroads where theory met warfare. Everything that comes after, the M16A2, the carbine generation, the modern AR ecosystem, rests on the decisions made during this narrow window of time. And understanding this era explains what the AR-15 is today. Thanks for sticking around. Here, watch another video. Let's build this community.